From NJ.com, this is Talk is Cheap, a New York Giants podcast. We're talking Big Blue football all year round.
What's going on, everybody? Zack Rosenblatt here with Matt Lombardo for the latest episode of the Talk is Cheap podcast. We're going to talk about the Giants. Obviously, they're a dumpster fire right now. They're looking even worse than I think you or I thought they possibly could have. But coming out of that last game, like what was your I don't know. I mean, we talked a lot after the game about like there's not any obvious winnable games even on their schedule right now. So like what was your feeling when you walked out of MetLife the other day?
Yeah, Zach, I think dumpster fire is the adequate term for this, right? Because if I'm driving down the road, I'm not necessarily going to look at the dumpster fire, but I'll look at the derailed train. I'll look at the car wreck. I'll look at the 5-alarm fire in the house and say, oh my God, I hope everybody's okay. And I'll probably stare a little bit longer than I should, but I'm not looking at the dumpster fire. And I think that if you and I weren't paid to watch the Giants right now, I don't think I would have made it much past the third quarter on Sunday, because that was easily Daniel Jones's worst performance as the Giants quarterback. The offense can't run the ball, can't block. The receivers are a guy named Damian Ratley and CJ Board, who are going to have to play prominent roles at least for the next couple of weeks. And the defense just can't seem to get off the field on third down. So I think dumpster fire is the perfect term to describe what the Giants are right now.
Other than all the things you just said, they're great, right?
Yeah, you wrote after the game, I think that there's a legitimate chance that they go 0-16. When you start looking down the schedule, and you look at just the way they've lost these games, like that was a one-score game going into halftime. And, I've kind of perfected the wait in line for the chicken fingers just before the 2-minute warning move. So right before the 2-minute warning, you might have seen me disappear from the press box, Zach, and wonder, where the heck did he go? I was actually watching from the section, I think it's like 249 or whatever, right by the concession stand where they have the food. And Jones and the offense take over on about the 15-yard line. You're thinking, okay, they can move down the field here. Maybe you get a field goal and you make it a one-score game going into the locker room. You're getting the ball back. Maybe you feel good about it. And he telegraphs a throw on second down right to Evan Ingram that's picked off. And it's just one of these things where he just can't seem to stop turning the football over. He's not getting any help from his supporting cast. And this is a team that was built around its offense, and they have the 31st ranked offense in the NFL. So things aren't great in East Rutherford.
I've been seeing like a lot, obviously. So right now I still live down in South Jersey, like outside of Philadelphia. So I hear the sports radio down here and all that stuff, and kind of the same things. It's a little bit different because Carson Wentz is in like his 5th year now, but a lot of the same, questions and issues that Carson Wentz is having are kind of the same as Daniel Jones, in the sense that, number one, he's playing really poorly and he's contributing to why they're losing these games. He's been inaccurate. He's turning the ball over too much, all of that. And then at the same time, like everything around him is falling apart. Like he's bad, but also everything around him is bad. So he's not exactly being put in the best position to succeed. The receivers, even they're good receivers, Golden Tate and Darius Slayton in theory, have not been getting separation like at all. If you look at the numbers, I think that it's down across the board for all of their receivers right now. Evan Ingram, I don't even know what he is at this point. I mean, he's in theory a weapon, but it's always been a theoretical thing. And we haven't really, in week 2, towards the end, he was catching some balls, but he's just not like the first round pick level talent that they need him to be. And like you said, the offensive line, like there's like Kevin Zeitler has been pretty consistent throughout the season, but pretty much everybody else has not. Andrew Thomas, the first 2 games I thought looked really good. I think he maybe took a little bit of a step back this last week. He's a rookie, though. That's going to happen. Like I'm not really as worried about him. Will Hernandez looks decidedly average, which was one of the bigger questions, I think, coming into the year.
I think you're being kind. I think that Will Hernandez has regressed pretty significantly. And, Andrew Thomas looked pretty decent in week 1. I think he's gotten worse with each week that's gone by. And you brought up the receiving core, Zach. I mean, the stat, I have a story coming out on Friday morning, just as this podcast goes live, on kind of the state of the offense. And, spoiler alert, it's not great. Darius Slayton had the 2 touchdowns in week 1. He hasn't found the end zone either of the last 2 games. He's averaging 14 yards per reception. But the bigger problem is along the offensive line and the running game. And, just crunching some of these numbers about the running game without Saquon Barkley, you think back to the first week and he had that 37-yard or whatever it was catch against the Steelers and the 18-yard run a couple of plays before he got hurt against the Bears and a 7-yard run mixed in there. No other running back on the Giants roster, Zach, has a run longer than 6 yards in the first 3 weeks. That's pathetic, right?
Yeah.
And you look at the running back production in general. Daniel Jones leads the Giants in rushing with 90 total yards. He's led them in rushing in 2 games. And the running backs on the roster, Devonta Freeman, Dion Lewis, and Wayne Gallman, they're averaging combined 1.2 yards per carry. So you're talking about, 38 inches per carry more than you and I are averaging for the Giants this year. So when you can't throw the ball and you can't run the ball, I don't know how you score.
I mean, I just pulled up the league stats for rushing yards. They're last in the NFL, averaging 56 rushing yards a game. They have 170 total for the season. And I forget, what was do you remember what the total was Daniel Jones has? It's like 90 something, right?
Yeah, I think he has 90 on the nose.
Yeah. And that's a quarterback leading. Like it, again, like those running backs, Devonta Freeman's he can't be much worse than what they've had so far. But again, it kind of goes back to the offensive line. Even if Saquon Barkley was back there, and I think you wrote about this at some point this week, that even if he was back there, or maybe you tweeted, I can't remember. But anyway, so he's had like 2 long runs. Other than that, there's nothing that anybody, even that guy, can do with this offensive line where they're getting in the backfield every single play. There's no holes being opened up. It's just a complete mess. And then on top of that, like it impacts their ability to run play action passes, which they're not doing enough of. Jason Garrett has been very uncreative through 3 games, and Daniel Jones is at his best when there's play action. And if the defense doesn't believe that you're going to run the ball or that it's going to be effective when you do, then they're not going to play against that either.
And that's the key. And, when I was driving home after the game on Sunday night, I called around to some of my, scouts that I know around the league, some former scouts who have been helpful in the past. And just, after watching that, I asked them point blank, how much does losing Saquon Barkley for the year impact Daniel Jones and his long-term development? And, the point that these scouts made was now you can key in on the running back. You don't have to worry about, the running back busting a big play. You can blitz Daniel Jones 2 and 3 times a series because you know that the rushing game isn't going to hurt you. And, there's that school of thought, and I think that you're starting to see it around the league, that you don't need to draft a running back high and quote-unquote running backs don't matter. But I think in terms of the Giants, when you built your roster around Saquon Barkley and you kind of pinned your offensive future with Daniel Jones and Barkley there, that the whole point is, with the offensive line not being able to block for anybody, not creating running lanes, if you had Saquon Barkley and he busted 1 or 2 18 or 35-yard runs or a big play in the screen game, defense have to respect that. They don't have to respect that threat of the offense right now. So all of the load is now on Daniel Jones's shoulders, and that's unfair for a lot of quarterbacks. It's especially unfair for a quarterback who's prone to putting the ball in harm's way, not holding on to the football, and is just in the infancy of his development. But Zach, I don't know about you. When I watched him last week, I don't see a quarterback who's getting better. I see a quarterback who's regressing.
Yeah, it's funny how quickly things turn. Like I think he showed some things that you can be happy with the first 2 weeks, but it certainly wasn't. It was like we were trying to find the positives in games that weren't like what you want to see out of a guy that's supposed to be your franchise guy. I know, again, he's in a difficult spot for sure. I don't know how many quarterbacks would succeed with this group. But I think it's fair to wonder like who he is and if he's going to be their guy going forward. And these next 13 games are going to be pretty much an audition for him because I think you and I both believe that Dave Gettleman will not be here at this time next year. If not at this time in a couple weeks, to be honest with you, if it keeps going the way it did in week 3. I
had somebody ask me today how much longer I think Dave Gettleman has, and I said I don't know that he makes it to Christmas or New Year's at the end of the year.
I think
Black Monday is certainly in play.
Like that would make sense. But I mean, to go back to where this conversation started, the thing that's going to ultimately cost Dave Gettleman his job is that he failed to build the offensive line. Like he's made a lot of other mistakes, but he's done a few good things that have kind of flying under the radar. But because of like how bad some of his bad stuff has been, like James Bradbury, we're going to talk about him, I'm sure, in a bit, and some of these free agent signings. And I think this offseason he was okay, but the offensive line, like across all 5 guys he brought in at this point, and you add Nate Solder to the mix, and that was an abject disaster. Andrew Thomas, hopefully he'll improve and become a franchise left tackle, but who knows? Will Hernandez is not as good as he was supposed to be. They are relying on a guy who's never played center before, and he's going to have to block Aaron Donald this week, so that's going to be interesting. Kevin Zeitler's been good, but you gave up Odell Beckham essentially to get him, and they were technically separate trades, but they combined them or whatever.
Yeah, and I think that the biggest issue
And
along the
Fleming,
offensive line, it's twofold. I mean, drafting Andrew Thomas, number 4 overall this year, it's great, okay, if he develops into that franchise left tackle. But you had 2 other drafts to take an offensive tackle that you could try to develop either as a right tackle or to push Nate Solder. And you just think about this, the way that they've handled the right tackle spot. They went out and they signed Patrick Omame to play guard because they were going to leave Eric Flowers at right tackle, and that wound up going bust on both fronts. Now you watch Eric Thomas, and he looks like more than a competent offensive guard in Jacksonville. If you would have just moved him to guard, maybe you could have salvaged him, even though he probably needed the benefit of a change of scenery. But just go back to last offseason. You bring in a Band-Aid in Mike Remmers. This year you bring in another Band-Aid in Cam Fleming, who might be their best offensive lineman through 3 games, but that's not saying much. And you relied on, as you said, a center who's never played center at any level in the NFL. And in his first 4 games, he had to go up against Bud Dupree and TJ Watt. He had to go up against calling the signals on where Khalil Mack was on every play. And in theory, up against Nick Bosa and Solomon Thomas, who were both hurt. And oh, by the way, the Giants still couldn't keep Daniel Jones upright or open up running lanes against the skeleton crew of the 49ers. And as you said, they have Aaron Donald this week. So you just have to wonder, why not make the switch? Why not put Spencer Pulley at center and move Nick Gates over to right tackle just to try to spark something with this offensive line? The Pro Football Focus, Zach, has ranked 31st out of 32 offensive lines in the league right now.
Yeah, offensive line is one position group that no matter how good you are, on the rest of your team, if your offensive line is bad, you're just not going anywhere because your quarterback doesn't have time, unless he's a quarterback that can make things happen when things break down and doesn't turn the ball over too much and whatever. Maybe he has a good safety valve that he can rely on to throw it to when everything's breaking down. The Giants don't have a safety valve for him. I don't think Golden Tate has been. I mean, he's been on the field, but I haven't noticed him really. And Evan Ingram, we talked about him before. Like, it's just, the weapons thing, like we talked about it as an issue, and maybe we didn't highlight it enough about how they don't have like a number one guy that you can rely on when everything falls apart. But the fact that it looks even worse that Gettleman didn't add any wide receivers this offseason now.
Yeah, for sure. And you look at the receivers who are drafted, and I know some of them are hurt, like Denzel Mims and Jalen Reagor and Michael Pittman, but that's just 3 in a loaded wide receiver class. You could have gone out and signed a veteran wide receiver in free agency to complement this group. And I know the expectations were high for Darius Slayton, and he certainly exceeded expectations as a rookie last year and, came on like gangbusters in the rookie, but in the regular season debut, rather, in week 1 against the Steelers. But I don't know that he's going to put up the kind of production that he did a year ago, because at least he had Saquon Barkley on the field for 13 games last year. At least Sterling Shepard was in the lineup from time to time. And, the offensive line, I think, even played better a year ago than the line that's playing right now. So you put all that together, and it was almost a perfect storm for Slayton to break out as a.
They just don't have any options right now. Like, there's no obvious solutions, and there all these issues that they have. We've been talking a lot about the offensive issues, and I don't see any obvious solutions there. Their hope is that Devontae Freeman looks like the Pro Bowler of old, but even if he is, I just don't see what he can do behind this line. And then you go to the defensive side of the ball, and they've struggled to stop the run, which was supposed to be a strength for them. In theory, that should get better, but the second cornerback spot, it's a revolving door of guys that nobody heard of before this year besides Corey Ballantyne. Isaac Yiadom has been starting he started last week. He played most of the snaps the week before. They just claimed a guy off the practice squad of the Raiders named Madre Harper, who I had never heard that name in my life before the day they claimed him. And there's a good chance that at some point this season he starts. And then safety, it's almost even scarier because with Jabril Peppers out, who, by the way, wasn't really playing that great anyway, now you have to replace him with Julian Love. And then if any of them get hurt, then you're left with Nate Ebner, Adrian Colbert, Sean Chandler, or Chris Williamson, who are the last 2 on the practice squad. And they like to play 3 safeties a lot, and Nate Ebner has played something like 20 snaps after not playing more than 3 since 2016. And even
that didn't go well in Chicago.
Jerome Henderson said when the assistant coaches talked to us the other day that they didn't even really practice him at safety leading up to this last game. And they kind of were like, all right, Nate, get out there. And then what happened. I think he gave up the 20-yard catch to Ross Dwelly, that tight end that nobody heard of before. He got like 3 catches against the Giants secondary. So like the secondary is a mess. that was supposed to be something that Dave Gettleman revamped. I know they've had some arrests and opt-outs and blah, 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 and then offensive line, and those ultimately are going to wind up being the death knell for him.
Yeah, I think that if you look at the positives on this defense, I think that Leonard Williams has taken the leap that everybody, at least the Giants, hoped that he would make coming into this year. I think he has 2 sacks already and, on pace for a career high in his first double-digit sack performance. It's still early, but I think that he's been probably their most disruptive defensive lineman. And you look at, Dexter Lawrence, he's in the mix there as well. And I think that Lorenzo Carter has played reasonably well, but they kind of are what they are on defense, right? Like, going into the year, I don't know about you, Zach, I thought this offense, and assuming Saquon was healthy and Shepard were healthy, and neither of those things are the case, so obviously things change, but I thought this offensive line had the chance to really put up some numbers, and I thought that you could average out 27, 31, 32 points a game, and you'd have to win some games 35, 31, but you had the firepower to do it. They don't have it right now. They certainly don't have more than one quality defensive back. They have a really good defensive back in James Bradbury, but, that was the biggest weakness going in. It's proven to be the biggest weakness. They've gone shopping for cornerbacks every week so far through the first 3 games. The linebacking core has kind of been average at best. Blake Martinez will look great in coverage or against the run, and then you'll see him just get pushed 15 yards off the line of scrimmage on a short touchdown run or a screen pass, and then you realize just how far away he is from being a complete linebacker. And I just think that when you can't score, you don't have dominant linebackers, you're not pressuring the quarterback consistently enough against a secondary that's prone to giving up big plays. And, oh, by the way, you don't get off the field on 3rd down, or you commit senseless penalties on like 3rd and 26 that extend drives. It's a mess, and it's a recipe for how you go 0-16. If you wanted to build a team that goes winless, which is tough to do in the NFL, it doesn't happen very often, this is what you would do. This is what it would look like.
And the craziest part about this, and we're recording this while the Jets are playing, which shows you how much interest we have in that game.
Yeah.
And the Jets,
if you look at ESPN's FPI, Zach, going into this week, the Giants had a 29% chance of landing the number 1 overall pick, the best odds. The Jets, who are winless as well and look like they could be on the verge of pulling the plug on Sam Darnold and Nick Gase, 19% chance for the number 1 pick. So the Giants have a better chance of finishing with the worst record in the league than the Jets do. That's crazy to me.
0-16, it's hyperbolic, of course. Like the odds of a team going, like you stumble into a win even if you don't deserve it oftentimes. But like there's just no. I go of the belief that until they show me that they are capable of beating another team, then why would I think they can?
Yeah, that's fair. And I think you can say that about both teams. Right? You can say that about the Jets or about the Giants.
Yeah, I was going to say, if not for the Jets, the Giants would be clearly the worst team in the NFL. And who knows if the Jets, can sneak a win or some point. I don't know. But and even just going off your point, I looked at 537. They do a percentage chance of winning for each week, and they had the Giants not with the higher percentage winning chance of any game except for one of the Washington games at home. So
this could be the week
going 1-15. Yeah.
Wow, that's crazy. Because when I look at the schedule, I think there's a chance that you beat Cincinnati, even though Joe Burrow looks like he's already on the cusp of being a top 15 quarterback as a rookie. I mean, you just watch what he did a couple weeks ago against the Browns and the moxie that he showed in Philadelphia, even though I know they tied, but what he needed to do down the stretch in that game, Joe Burrow looks like the real deal. Other than Cincinnati, the Eagles at MetLife, because that situation looks like it's unraveling more and more every day, and they're getting more and more injured every day. I think that, that might be the one situation in the NFC East that I'd prefer not to be over the Giants. And then you look at Washington, the football team, if they're healthy with Ryan Kerrigan and Chase Young, the football team might get 7 or 8 sacks on Daniel Jones.
That's exactly the issue. I mean, and that's kind of like one of the main reasons why I believe 0-16 is a thing that's a possibility, because like we said, this offensive line, usually if they're this bad, they don't really get much better. The odds, I mean, I guess they're playing more games together is the theory the Giants are going by, which is why they haven't subbed anybody yet. But you look at the schedule coming up, you got Dallas coming up, and their pass rush is unreal. They have DeMarcus Lawrence, Aldon Smith, who looks like he used to. They have Everson Griffin, who they just added, and they have some other guys. And, Washington, like you mentioned, Chase Young, Ryan Kerrigan, Montez Sweat. The Eagles, even though they're struggling, their defensive line is their strength. And Fletcher Cox will destroy Nick Gates. So, I mean, we've Aaron Donald this week. that we're going to be watching them go against. So I just don't have any I wouldn't even put the odds at very good that Daniel Jones makes it through 16 games without having to miss a game or two.
Yeah, you know what? All it takes is one hit, right? And I think that for all the doom and gloom and all of the negativity, I haven't seen him get rocked so far this year. There was the bad decision when Bud Dupree, batted his arm and the ball floated into the air for an interception in the opener at the 9-yard line. He's been sacked. He's taken some hits on the run, but there haven't been, knock on wood for the kid's sake, there haven't been any of those hits where you recoil and you think, oh my God, is he going to get up? You know what I mean? So at least he's not getting clobbered out there. You know what I mean? But I think the Giants offensive line has already given up something like 38 pressures through 3 games. And that's just not how you develop a young quarterback. That's not how you get a quarterback with fumbling issues who likes to be aggressive to hone in that aggressiveness and be productive. That's just not how it works.
Okay, so we have been pretty negative, so and understandably. So I would just say we can shine a light on a couple of guys who have been. You mentioned a couple of them. I think James Bradbury maybe has been the surprise of the season for me. Honestly, he's been absolute shutdown level corner. I think he leads the league with 9 pass deflections. He has an interception.
Yep.
At this rate, he'll probably make a Pro Bowl if he keeps it up like this. I mean, guys on losing teams like this often don't really get into the Pro Bowl, but I think people are talking about him enough, and this is going to go down as, if not the best move that Dave Gettleman made, then certainly one of the top 2 or 3.
No, I agree. And I'm sure we'll talk about this a little bit later in the pod, but, Dave Gettleman's probably given the Giants 3 to 4 cornerstone building block type of players. And I wrote about this earlier in the week. James Bradbury, to me, is second on that list. And you just look at what he's doing week after week with the interception against the Bears, the 9 pass breakups that you brought up, his ability to play lockdown cornerback while mostly traveling against the opponent's best receiver, Allen Robinson with the Bears. Traveled a little bit with Juju in week 1, but he's been, in my opinion, Zach, he's been their MVP. Offense or defense, I think Bradbury's been their MVP. You can make a case that Leonard Williams is the defensive player of the year, or at least the most improved player of the year on the roster. But, I look at James Bradbury, and that's a move that I think a lot of people kind of said, oh, well, they didn't get Byron Jones in free agency, or they missed out on this cornerback. And yeah, they paid James Bradbury a lot of money, but was he kind of a consolation prize to the big names? And that just hasn't been the case. He's been everything the Giants had hoped for and then some. He was obviously going to be a great fit for the scheme because of how good he is in zone coverage and how much Graham plays zone defense. But he's played as well as anybody could have expected.
Yeah, and he's been honestly better than I realized he would be. And so a guy that they have under contract for 3 years now, and whoever comes in next, they can at least be confident in the fact that they have a number 1 quarterback, and then they just have to fix what's going on across the field.
Yeah, you have to fix probably 3 other defensive back spots because, you picked up the 50-year option on Jabril Peppers, but this is now 2 years in a row where he's been injured. And like you said at the top of the podcast, I don't think Jabril Peppers has really set the world on fire on defense. I mean, he's had a couple of nice, punt returns and sparked a couple of plays on special teams, but I don't know that Jabril Peppers is a guy that you want to have as a 3-down safety. Xavier McKinney, you hope that rookies are kind of, wild cards and lottery tickets anyway, but you hope that the potential that he showed you at Alabama, he still has after breaking his foot. So maybe you have one safety spot shored up, but you still need to figure out what you're going to do long-term in the nickel because Logan Ryan isn't the answer there. And you have nothing at outside cornerback opposite of Bradbury. So yes, it's great they have the 1 cornerback and he has the chance to be a really good productive player for them for a long time. But there's still a lot of work to do in that secondary.
Jumping off that, so you wrote a story a day or 2 ago where you kind of went through what cornerstone players has Dave Gettleman actually added since he became GM, and do you want to go through who the guys who you think he did and who are it's still the question marks? I thought it was a good angle.
Yeah, thanks. I just was thinking about his track record as GM and the fact that he's had 3 drafts, 3 off seasons worth of free agent, periods, and he's made 26 draft picks 7 were on the starting lineup for the Giants this year on offense or defense, and 5 players drafted over the last 3 years are no longer on the roster. And, you look at the cornerstone players, and I think there's 4. I think you can look at, or maybe even 3. You look at Dexter Lawrence, who, when I surveyed general managers and executives and scouts earlier this summer, Dexter Lawrence was far and away the player that these guys named the Giants' second best player, not named Saquon Barkley. And you look at Dexter Lawrence so far this year, he has a 79.3 run stopping grade from Pro Football Focus and a 76.9 overall grade. So he's really lived up to expectations. I have Bradbury in that mix, and I still have Saquon Barkley there as a cornerstone. And yes, it's a little bit of an unknown how he responds to, tearing his ACL and the rehab and how all that goes. But when healthy, he's probably a top 5 running back in the league. But you talk about cornerstone foundational players in 3 off seasons to add just 3 to a 53-man roster. I just don't think that's good enough.
Whoever replaces Dave Gettleman is really going to have their work cut out for them. It's pretty much a full-on rebuild, honestly, especially depending on what they think about Daniel Jones. Because
yeah, for sure. And there are some building blocks, like some guys in that next tier down from cornerstones. Like I think Andrew Thomas, assuming he finds his footing at left tackle, you talk to all these offensive line gurus and coaches and scouts. And, some teams that I spoke to around the draft had him as their number 1 tackle. And the Miami Dolphins and Cleveland Browns were both considering taking him in round 1. So when you have that kind of talent, you're that respected around the league, hard for me to say you're going to be a bust after 3 games. So I have Andrew Thomas in the possible building block category, Zeitler. But the problem with Zeitler is he's going to be 31. He's going to be 32 next March. So if you're talking about 2 years from now being in a position to compete, what's Zeitler going to be at 33 years old as an offensive lineman? And then you look at Leonard Williams. We've talked about him. If they wind up paying him a long-term contract and keeping him in East Rutherford and he continues to play at this level, I think he can be a building block type of player. And then Lorenzo Carter is kind of the wild card there. I have him as kind of that last of that group.
Yeah, I think that all tracks. And, you can someone like Darius Slayton doesn't seem like he's a building block more as he's like a number 2, number 3 type receiver, and guys like Will Hernandez, as we talked about, are not at that level. And, other than that, Dalvin Tomlinson, I'd be surprised if he even was back here next year based on how much money he could make. He's been pretty good this year too, by the way. We didn't mention him.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. Yeah. But again, he wasn't picked by Gettleman. He was a Jerry Reese holdover.
I'm more talking generally about the – but yeah, in terms of Gettleman guys, there's not very many of those, and that's kind of why they're in the position they are. A lot of these –
yeah, I have Daniel Jones, Will Hernandez, Julian Love, and Jabril Peppers as kind of question mark players. Like if they exceed expectations so far and play above their production of these first 3 games and, show signs of developing, they could be in that category of being a building block, but you just don't know right now. And, you bring up a good point. I probably could have swapped out Darius Slayton for Will Hernandez because I don't think Hernandez has progressed. I think he's got progressively worse over the last 2 seasons since his rookie year where he showed a little bit of promise. And, everybody talked about Mark Colombo being the guy to come in and get the most out of this offensive line and that Will Hernandez was the guy who's going to benefit the most. That just hasn't happened.
Yeah. It's they're in so this is a good way we can transition to to look ahead to this game coming up on Sunday a little bit. Cause I think the Rams, they've had some issues roster building. They've overspent on some guys, but they have a very talented core where you would take almost everyone in their core over the guys in the Giants core. You look at Aaron Donald, Jalen Ramsey, Robert Woods, Cooper Kupp, probably missing a person or 2. And so that's like a group that the Giants are going to have a lot of trouble with, especially because I don't know if they match up with them particularly well. What are you thinking when you look at this matchup? The Rams just lost to the Bills by 3 points after they went down by a lot, and then they came back and they killed the Eagles the week before that, and they beat the Cowboys in week 1. So they're a team that's a little bit better than I thought they were going to be.
Yeah, I thought they showed me something when they beat the Cowboys in week 1. I thought that was a statement win for them. And the Bills, I think, are for real. I think the Bills are one of the top 4 best teams in the AFC. So, going cross country and losing on the road, I don't think there's much shame in that. But I don't know about you, but when I watch the Rams, Zach, I kind of feel like you're seeing vintage Sean McVay. The offense isn't as predictable as it had been the last year or two. I think Jared Goff is playing within himself and being a game manager. And, Darrell Henderson as a running back seems to be an ideal replacement for Todd Gurley. People kind of scratch their heads when they traded Gurley to the Falcons earlier this offseason. But, I think that Henderson is a guy who's really stepped in. And I think that this is a defense that could pose some issues for the Giants, who just can't seem to get going, as we talked about. I mean, Jalen Ramsey at outside cornerback, Donald up the middle. We've talked about the mismatch that is against Nick Gates. And, they just have playmakers on both sides of the ball that, and you have to go cross country too, which is no small feat in today's COVID-19 environment.
Yeah, and I mean, one of the biggest areas of concern, like defensively, you look at, so you look at, they have Cooper Kupp in the slot, so I guess that would mean that Darnay Holmes is going to have to cover him, because Logan Ryan and Julian Love are kind of going to have to focus on some other things with Jabril Peppers out, because they kind of removed like a guy who can play up the line of scrimmage and stuff. And then you look on the outside, like I'm sure they're going to move Robert Woods around, and they're probably going to have to try and get James Bradbury to follow him. And then they have two tight ends that are pretty good in Tyler Higbee and Gerald Everett, who are going to pose matchup problems for those safeties who have had troubles tackling, and the linebackers who Blake Martinez is up and down in coverage. So Jared Goff, if Nick Mullins is going to pick apart this defense, then Jared Goff certainly is too.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that he has some better weapons to throw the ball to. So I think this gets out of hand pretty quick, actually. And I think that it's one of these games where, it's going to call into question even more, is Daniel Jones the guy? The whispers about Dave Gettleman's future are only going to get louder. You're going to start to wonder whether Jason Garrett is the offensive coordinator to turn this thing around. And, you look at their track record in terms of Jason Garrett using pre-snap motion in Dallas. They haven't used pre-snap motion very much at all. This year they haven't really gone play action at all, and that threat is kind of gone without Barkley being in the backfield. You don't really need to respect that. So, I think this is one of these deals where if the Rams score 27 points, I think they win the football game. And you look at what the Rams have done this year, they've hung tight and they've, put up some points in all of their games so far. I mean, they lost to the Bills. You pointed it out, 35-32. They beat the Eagles rather 37-19, and they edged out the Cowboys in the fourth quarter 20-17. So they're capable of scoring. They're capable of making key stops on defense when they have to. And those are two things the Giants just haven't shown the ability to do right now.
Yeah. And let's get to how we think this game plays out. So I think the Rams are going to beat them pretty handily. Maybe not like blowout level of last week. I think I have them at 31-17. I think the Rams, especially because, like you said, Darrell Henderson's looked pretty good. They have a couple other running. They have Malcolm Brown and Cam Akers, and they have those tight ends and those receivers. I just think the Giants are going to have a really tough time stopping that offense.
Yeah, I do too, and I think they're going to have trouble moving the football. I think that, that's a pretty accurate score. I think there's a chance they lose something like 37-17. That was alarming last week for me. When you're without Solomon Thomas, you're without Nick Bosa, you're without on offense Nick Mullins, you're without your top running backs, and the Giants got gashed on both sides of the ball. So, to me, until, like you said, they show you the ability to compete with teams, let alone win games, it's going to be really tough to pick them to win.
I agree. All right, we can wrap up on that point. Before we go, make sure you guys are subscribing to this podcast. We're on all the apps, Apple, Spreaker, Google Play, all the good stuff. And leave us some reviews. That helps us get this listened by a lot more people. And subscribe to our text service so you can hear from us directly instead of going through the clutter of Twitter. And you can go find that by going to NJ.com/text. Any last comments before we get out of here, Matt?
No, it's a shame that we're not going to be in LA. It's one of my favorite American cities. The stadium looks unbelievable, and in any other year, we'd be out there together. At some point, I think the Giants play the Chargers next year, so we have that to look forward to. But, of all the things that COVID-19 has robbed us of, and certainly our hearts go out to everybody who was affected by the disease or lost a loved one especially, but losing out a trip to LA, that ranks pretty high on the list of things that I'm bummed out about professionally because of the virus.
My family, I was born in LA, actually. Fun fact. Moved when I was 2 years old. But my family also lives out there, so that's like a yearly trip where I go a couple times. A lot of times I wind up going for work. It works out that way, especially when I was working in the Pac-12. So you look at So as sports writers, we look at the next year's schedule pretty far in advance, and you get like
yes.
you get
Where
a
are the
little
good
too excited
trips?
about which road trips you're getting. And this year was LA and Seattle were the main ones I was really excited about. But
in Chicago, those three were the big three for me. Three of my favorites.
Know that it's a thing we lost, but we'll get it back soon. And I guess on the bright side, we get to spend time with our families a little more. So,
of course, and nothing wrong with that. Zach, this was a lot of fun.
So, yeah, we'll wrap up on that note. Thanks for listening, guys, and we'll get you guys a pod sometime early next week.
What's new in podcasting? Here's what we love, courtesy of Acast Recommends.
Hey pals, you know your smart, funny friends who always seem to have the best celebrity gossip?
Personally, I find it unsettling when I look at Britney Spears' Instagram.
I'm talking about the ones who always know what you should be watching or reading or listening to. Pop Chat is a brand new podcast that does exactly that and feels like spending time with your best friends.
I'm going to recommend a very good anime movie from 1997.
Okay, well, this call's over now.
No judgment, no judgment.
So join me, Alameen Abdul Mahmoud, and a panel of the smartest and funniest culture critics that I know as we dissect the discourse, but also have a great time doing it. It's where smart talk meets really big laughs, and it's coming to your feed starting September 16th.
Acast recommends.